The streets of Damascus became a haunting canvas of pain and defiance as the funeral procession of Mazen Al Hamada wove through the city. His coffin, draped in the green, white, and black flag, the symbol of a revolution that began in 2011, was carried by a crowd whose grief could no longer be contained. "We gave our blood and soul to the revolution," they chanted, voices hoarse and trembling. The air was thick with the anguish of a people whose spirit had been crushed, but who still refused to be silenced. As the procession moved, more and more joined, shouting, "Mazen is a martyr." Their tears mixed with their cries, creating a bittersweet melody of both mourning and resistance. Mazen's death was not merely the loss of a man, it was a symbol of the brutal price of speaking truth to power. He had given his voice, his body, and ultimately his life to expose the horrors of Bashar al-Assad's regime. A relentless critic of the regime, Mazen's activism shone a light on the atrocities the world had ignored for far too long. His body, discovered in the infamous slaughterhouse, Saydnaya prison, bore the scars of unspeakable torture. Fractures, burn marks, and contusions covered his body, evidence of a torment that could not be ignored. His face was smashed, his nose broken, his sister, Lamia, mourned, her words barely audible through the grief. Mazen had been there at the beginning, when the uprising erupted in 2011, full of hope, courage, and the fire of revolution. He was arrested and tortured, subjected to horrors that no human being should endure. Released in 2013, he sought asylum in the Netherlands, where he began to share his story, his pain, and the brutal reality he had witnessed. In a powerful documentary, he described how he was raped, how guards jumped on his chest, breaking his ribs, how his spirit was almost broken by the unrelenting cruelty. But despite the trauma, Mazen's heart remained chained to his people. In a twist of tragic fate, after years of asylum, he returned to Syria in 2020, promised safety by the government, only to be arrested the moment he stepped foot in his homeland. His family believes he was killed after the fall of Hama, mere days before the regime's collapse. "I am happy we are free, but I wish he could have lived to see it," Lamia said softly, her voice a mix of pride and sorrow. "He paid the price for our freedom." Mazen's story was one of many. It was a small piece in a much larger, horrific puzzle. Over 100,000 people disappeared under Assad's rule, their families left to search through the ruins for answers. In a morgue in Damascus, bodies were laid out in stark rows. The stench of death was overpowering. Some bodies were decapitated, others marked by unspeakable torture. In a corner, a plastic bag lay discarded with a human skull and bones. The families, their faces etched with despair, sifted through the remains, hoping for the impossible, to find the body of a lost loved one. Ahmad Sultan Eid's mother collapsed as she identified her 19-year-old son's disfigured body. The sound of her wailing was enough to break the heart of anyone within earshot. "Oh, my boy, my baby, you were only 19, she cried. Her anguish was the cry of every mother who had lost a son, a daughter, a husband, or a father to this brutal war. Ahmad's brother leaned against the wall, his face contorted in grief, unable to fathom the loss. But it wasn't just Ahmad's family. All around, others searched for their own missing loved ones. "How can you find anyone if you're searching through skeletons?" asked Mustafa Khairul Inam, a father who had been searching for his sons, Omar and Mohammed, since 2011. He stood in a room filled with the souls of the disappeared, each one a broken story of hope, pain, and loss. Ahmad Masri was there too, looking for his brother Khalil. "Until now, we weren't allowed to ask where they were," he said, his voice hollow with rage. "Can you imagine what it's like to not know where they are, to be unable to ask? Maybe they're in a mass grave somewhere." His words were a damning indictment of a regime that sought to erase its victims from history. In the chaos of grief and rage, a woman's voice rose above the crowd, full of fury. Every mother who is looking for her son should get revenge against Assad. Putin should not give him refuge. He should send Assad back so we can execute him in a public square. The desire for justice, for vengeance, burned in the hearts of these people, who had been silenced for so long. I turned to Lamia, hoping to understand what justice for her brother would look like. "The perpetrators have escaped," she said, her eyes hard with determination. "But I want them brought back. I want them to be tried in a court of law." Her voice was steady, but the pain was unmistakable. Mazen's story was not just one of suffering. It was a testament to the resilience of a people who had been broken but not defeated. The wounds inflicted by Assad's regime ran deep, but the pain was not the end. It was a beginning of a search for truth, for justice, and for the bodies of those who had been lost to this war. And for Mazen, who had given everything for the cause, his family and his people would continue the fight, no matter the cost.